Joining us now on our Book Talk segment on Talk Across America, great to welcome author of a very interesting book, something that happened quite a while ago, but kind of a mystery involved in it. Also a little bit of a historical book as well. We all know Dr. Jane Goodall. She's, of course, famous for her chimpanzee research camp over in Tanzania in Africa. This involved something that happened with one of her staff members that unfortunately died. We're going to find out about it now. The book is called The Ghosts of Gombe, a true story of love and death in an African wilderness. And we're joined today by Dale Peterson from up in Boston. And Dale, good to talk with you. How are you?
Well, I'm great, and good to talk with you, Doug.
Yeah, I had a chance to read through the book, and interesting topic, because I've heard of Dr. Goodall. We've seen her on TV, over the years doing documentaries and stuff, but I had never heard about this story. This took place back in the late 60s, I guess 1969 to be exact. First of all, how did you get involved in the project?
Well, of course, I've known Jane Goodall for 30 years. I was her biographer, and
right.
I co-authored a book with her. So, co-authoring a book is a little bit like getting married. You can wind up hating the person, or you can wind up being lifelong friends. And Jane and I are lifelong friends, I would say. I knew about this story for quite a while. I knew about it when I was writing the biography, and in fact, I wrote a chapter on the death of this young woman, who incidentally died 49 years ago to this day.
Yeah, right.
On July 12th.
As we talk today, right?
1969, right. So I knew the basic story, but I just didn't know the story in great detail. And what happened was I had a very close friend. In fact, this is the person who originally introduced me to Jane Goodall so many years ago, 30 years ago, and his name was Geza Teleki. He had been a student researcher with Jane in the late 60s, and then he became her colleague later on. Geza, as it happened, had been the boyfriend and the fiancé of the young woman who died. Her name was Ruth. And Geza never talked about Ruth, and I could tell that it was just a sore subject, so I never brought it up. I was a little intimidated by his silence on the matter and his style. But in 2006, he phoned me up and said, Dale, I need to talk, and he wanted to talk about Ruth. And so I went down to his place in Washington, D.C., and I spent hundreds of hours with Geza over the next few years, talking to him about Ruth and going over the details of her life, tape recording everything, and that's the core of the book. The presumption had been years ago that Ruth had died by accident, and that was the police report. But nobody witnessed this accident, and Geza began to discover that there were rumors that, number one, Ruth had actually committed suicide, number two, that she had been pushed. So, there are three ways. Her body was found at the base of a waterfall, so we can assume that she fell, and her skull was crushed in. But there are three ways to fall.
Right.
You can jump, you can be pushed, you can fall accidentally. And so Geza was upset, and he was actually dying himself. He was very ill during the period of our conversation. And so I wrote the book to explore this whole issue, what happened to Ruth.
Yeah, she was an American volunteer that
she was an American,
went over there, and you describe in the book very well what it was like, just doing the whole project of Dr. Goodall. Not very pleasant conditions they were under, so very difficult to live there at the time, right? Any time, I guess.
Well, I guess the people who were there loved being there, so pleasant is probably a matter of opinion, but it was certainly stressful and difficult, right. And they were very isolated and very fundamental, basic situation.
She obviously wanted to be part of this whole thing, and you talk again about studying the chimpanzees. I mean, that's dangerous in itself. You described the the other animals in the area that made it difficult to just kind of walk around. Snakes, I know, were something you had to look out for. So a lot of hazards there. So and as dealing with chimpanzees, they can be a little difficult at times, even though they seem friendly. They can be dangerous as well, right?
Well, yes. Although it's really remarkable how undangerous they are in that situation. If you have a chimpanzee in, say, a zoo, or held in a cage in somebody's private home, that's a dangerous animal,
right?
Because it's an animal that's frustrated, angry, upset, doesn't understand why he or she is a prisoner. And at Gombe, where the chimpanzees are wild and free, if they're upset, they can just leave. So there are not vicious attacks by chimpanzees, and that's given that Jane Goodall has been doing this research for 60 years, and there have been a number of other, many other researchers there, and there's no record of anybody being violently attacked by a chimpanzee in a way that was physically damaging. I mean, people have been, dragged by chimps and hit by chimps, but nothing nothing with full ferocity, which they clearly can do. That's remarkable. And so it is a dangerous place. Lots of poisonous snakes, other dangerous animals. And, the chimps could accidentally kill somebody as well. I don't know that they would kill a person deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
There's no evidence that they've ever done that.
And again, we want people to to read the book and find out the details on it. But you kind of make the case of what it could have been, like you said, accidental suicide, which I don't think it was, but people can judge that, or somebody did that to her, or an animal did that to her. What was was there a lot of press on this when this happened? I would guess not, right? Since it was so isolated.
No, it happened so far away, in the middle of Africa, and with bad communications between Africa and the States. There was virtually no press in the States about this death, and very little in Africa as well. It just happened, and people moved on with their lives afterwards.
Yeah. And again, this happened, like we said, July 12, 1969, which another thing happened that day. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. So people weren't paying attention to anything except that at that point, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think that was the moonwalk may have been a few days later.
Yeah. They had landed, I think, that day. Maybe that was it. Yeah, the day they landed.
Yeah.
Right. But, I mean, you talk about that in the book, that was going on at the time as a historical point.
Yeah. No, that's right. And that's, it's one thing I do in the book is put it in a historical context. It was very much the late 60s, and, there were some marijuana smoking going on at the research camp.
Right.
And I detail the lives of these people, a half dozen to a dozen researchers living in this situation of tremendous isolation, and at the same time some level of intimacy with each other that was part of this situation.
Right.
So there were
people get involved with each other no matter where they are.
Yeah,
so that was part of it.
That's right. Yeah, and sometimes the involvements are not positive. I think there was a good deal of social tension in the group. Not surprising. If you think of people on a space capsule flying to Mars, you realize that this level of forced intimacy and isolation can have strong effects on people's behavior.
Yeah. That I'm not so sure that's going to be a fun trip if we ever do go to Mars.
I'm not going to do it.
Unless they can do it like in Star Trek, where you could do it in a matter of hours. They haven't invented that yet.
No, they haven't discovered how to
Well, it's a fascinating book. Again, it's a true story, but it kind of almost reads like a novel. Just the people involved. But sadly, I mean, the woman died in it. But you kind of open it up as kind of a mystery as well. And again, it's called The Ghosts of Gombe, a true story of love and death in an African wilderness. And we've been talking with Dale Peterson today. And Dale, I think we gave our audience a taste of what it could be. Hopefully, they'll want to hear more. I think they will. Do you have a website you can direct people to get more information on the book?
Sure, DalePetersonAuthor.com.
And that's Peterson, right? I want to spell that correctly.
That's right, yeah.
And you can check that out. And Dale, pleasure talking to you. Hopefully we can do it again.
Great talking to you, Doug.
Great. Bye now.
Bye.